The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a kilometer. Thousands of seats rose in circular tiers, filled with representatives from species that had ruled the stars for millions of years. Light from distant nebulas poured through the transparent ceiling, painting everything in soft purple and gold. It was a place of power, of ancient laws, and of cold indifference. Doc Ambassador Kang Taio walked slowly to the human delegation's small platform. His gray hair was neatly combed, and his dark suit was simple compared to the flowing robes and glittering armor of the alien delegates around him. He was 60 years old, and he had spent 30 of those years in diplomatic service. He had learned patience. He had learned to smile when insulted. He had learned to wait. Humanity had been part of the Galactic Confederation for 120 years. In cosmic terms, they were newborns. The elder species looked at humans the way adults look at children playing with toys. Amusing, harmless, forgettable. Taio took his seat and folded his hands. Beside him sat his aide, a young woman named Ji-Wan Lee. She was nervous. This was her first council session. "Stay calm," Taio whispered without looking at her. "They will try to make us feel small. That is their way. We smile. We nod. We remember." The session began with minor matters. Trade disputes between insectoid species. Mining rights in a distant asteroid belt. A complaint about communication satellite interference. Hours passed. Taio remained perfectly still, his face showing nothing. Finally, the topic he had waited for arrived. "The human delegation has submitted a formal request," announced the High Chancellor. A tall being named Torin, whose pale skin seemed to glow faintly. His voice was flat and emotionless. They wished to establish colonies in the Orion sector. A murmur passed through the hall. The Orion sector was unclaimed space. No species wanted it. The stars there were old and dim, the planets rocky and cold. It was perfect for humanity, whose population had grown beyond Earth's capacity. Taio stood. "Honored Council," he said, his voice clear and steady. "We ask only for what no one else desires. The Orion sector has been empty for 10,000 years. We wish to build homes there for our people. Nothing more." He expected quick approval. Instead, a harsh voice cut through the chamber. "The Malorian hegemony objects." Taio turned slowly. Councillor Veth of the Malorian hegemony had risen from his seat. He was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with gray-scaled skin and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. His yellow eyes fixed on Taio with open contempt. "On what grounds?" Taio asked politely. Veth smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Security concerns. The Orion sector borders our territory. We cannot allow an unstable species to establish military positions so close to our worlds." "We have no military intentions," Taio replied. "These are civilian colonies. Farmers, scientists, families." "Today, perhaps," Veth said, his voice dripping with false concern. "But humans breed quickly. Like insects. Who knows what you will become in 100 years? Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. Taio felt Ji-Wan stiffen beside him. He placed a gentle hand on her arm, keeping her still. "We request a formal vote," Taio said calmly. The vote was held. It was not close. 63 species sided with the Malorians. 12 abstained. 4 voted with humanity. The request was denied. After the session, Taio walked through the station's long corridors toward the human quarter. Ji-Wan walked beside him, her face red with anger. "They laughed at us," she said. "They compared us to insects." "Yes," Taio agreed. "And you said nothing." "I said everything that needed to be said." He stopped and looked at her. "Words spoken in anger are forgotten. Words spoken in calm are remembered." We will have our answer, Juan, but not today. They reached the human embassy, a small section of the station with plain walls and simple furniture. It looked poor compared to the grand halls of other species, but it was home. Tai-Ho went to his private office and sat at his desk. He activated a secure communication channel to Earth. The face of Admiral Juan Siajum appeared on the screen. He was a hard man with a scarred face and eyes that had seen too much war. "Ambassador," Juan said, "I heard about the vote." "They're testing us," Tai-Ho replied. "The Malorians have never cared about the Orion sector. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity can be pushed." "And can we?" Tai-Ho was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Tell command to increase readiness. Quietly. No announcements. Just preparation." Juan nodded. "Understood. Is there something specific I should watch for?" "I don't know yet, but something is coming. I can feel it." He ended the call and sat alone in the darkness of his office. For 30 years, he had believed in diplomacy. He had believed that patience and reason could overcome prejudice. Tonight, for the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong. 3 days later, the news arrived. Tai-Ho was eating breakfast when Jiwan burst into his quarters. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "Sir," she said, her voice breaking, "the colony ship New Soul. It's gone silent." Tai-Ho set down his cup. "Where?" "Near the border of Malorian space. It was carrying 40,000 people. Families, children. They were heading to the outer settlements." "When did we lose contact?" 6 hours ago. We've sent signals. Nothing comes back." Tai-Ho stood slowly. A cold feeling spread through his chest. "Send word to Captain Yuna Park. Tell her to take the horizon and investigate immediately." "Full speed." "Yes, sir." Jiwan ran out. Tai-Ho walked to his window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 40,000 of his people were waiting, hoping, perhaps dying. He pressed his hand against the cold glass. "Please," he whispered to no one, "let me be wrong." But deep in his heart, he knew he was not wrong. He knew what was coming. The fragile peace that humanity had accepted for over a century was about to shatter. And when it did, the galaxy would learn something it had forgotten. Humans did not forgive, and humans never forgot. Captain Yuna Park had served in the fleet for 18 years. She had seen combat. She had seen death. But nothing had prepared her for what floated before her now. The HSS Horizon dropped out of faster than light. Travel at the last known coordinates of the New Soul. What they found was not a ship. It was a graveyard. Pieces of metal drifted through the void. Some were small, no larger than a hand. Others were massive sections of hull, twisted and burned. Among the wreckage floated other things. Bodies, thousands of them. Men and women and children, frozen in the emptiness of space, their faces locked in expressions of terror. Yuna stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the railing so hard, her knuckles turned white. Around her, the crew worked in complete silence. Some had tears running down their faces. Others could not look at the screens. "Scan for survivors," Yuna ordered. Her voice was steady, but inside she was screaming. For 3 hours they searched. They found nothing alive. The ship had been torn apart by weapons fire. Not just destroyed, slaughtered. The attack had come without warning, and it had been thorough. Then, just as hope was dying, a signal came. "Captain," her sensor officer said, "there's something in the cargo section. A life sign." Very weak, Yuna ran to the shuttle bay herself. She led the rescue team through the floating debris, pushing past the bodies of people who had been alive just days ago. They reached a sealed cargo container, half crushed but still intact. Inside, they found her. Dr. Narration was 29 years old. She was a biologist who had been traveling to the outer colonies to study alien plant life. She had hidden in the cargo bay when the attack began. She had sealed herself inside a supply container. She had survived on emergency oxygen for 6 days. When they pulled her out, she was barely conscious. But she was holding something. A data recorder. "I saw everything," she whispered. "I recorded it. They killed everyone. The Malorians. They killed everyone." Yuna held the young woman as the medical team arrived. She looked at the data recorder in Nari's trembling hands. "We'll make sure the galaxy sees this," Yuna promised. "I swear it." 48 hours later, Ambassador Kong Taiho stood in his office on the Galactic Council station. Before him, a holographic display showed the contents of Nari's recording. He watched in silence as Malorian warships appeared without warning. He watched as they opened fire on an unarmed civilian vessel. He watched as escape pods launched, carrying families trying to flee. He watched as Malorian fighters hunted down each pod and destroyed it. He watched as Malorian soldiers boarded the crippled ship and executed survivors with plasma weapons. He watched 40,000 people die. When the recording ended, Taiho realized his hands were shaking. In 30 years of diplomacy, they had never shaken before. Chi-1 stood by the door, her face wet with tears. "What do we do?" she asked. Tae-ho was silent for a long moment. Then he straightened his jacket and walked toward the door. "I am calling an emergency session of the Council," he said. "Inform Earth Command. Tell Admiral Huan to prepare the fleet." All of it. The Galactic Council chamber was full within the hour. Word had spread that the human ambassador had demanded an emergency session. Curiosity brought representatives from every corner of the galaxy. Taiho walked to the center podium. He looked up at the thousands of faces watching him. Many were amused. Some were bored. A few, very few, looked concerned. He activated the recording. For 10 minutes, the chamber watched the massacre of the new soul in complete silence. When it ended, Taiho spoke. 40,000 human beings, he said. Men, women, children, murdered without warning, without reason, without mercy. We have confirmed the weapons signatures. We have identified the ships. This was done by the Malorian hegemony. He turned to face Counselor Veth, who sat in his elevated seat with an expression of mild annoyance. "I demand justice," Taiho said. "I demand the immediate arrest of those responsible. I demand reparations for the families of the dead. I demand a full investigation by the Council." Silence hung in the air. Then Counselor Veth laughed. "This recording is obviously fake," he said, waving a clawed hand dismissively. "Human technology is primitive. They could have created this in a day. The hegemony denies any involvement in this supposed incident." Taiho felt something break inside him, something he had held together for 30 years. "High Chancellor," he said, turning to Torin, "will this council investigate?" Torin's glowing face showed nothing. "The evidence is ... disputed. Without Malorian cooperation, an investigation would be difficult. Perhaps this matter is best resolved through diplomatic channels." "Diplomatic channels," Taiho repeated. The words tasted like ash. He looked around the chamber, at the hundreds of species who had watched children being murdered and chosen to do nothing, at the silent witnesses who valued their comfort over justice, at the cowards who called themselves leaders. "Is there anyone here who will stand with humanity?" he asked. Silence. Ho nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket and removed his diplomatic credentials, the symbol of his authority and his lifetime of service. He placed them gently on the podium. "Then let it be known," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "From this moment, the United Earth government formally declares a state of war against the Malorian hegemony. A gasp rippled through the assembly. Counselor Veth laughed again, louder this time. War? You? Humanity against the hegemony? You will be crushed in a week. Taiho did not look at him. Instead, he looked at all the silent faces watching from their comfortable seats. And to every species who stood silent today, he continued, his voice cold and steady, remember this moment. Remember that when innocent people begged for justice, you looked away. Because humanity will remember. We will remember for a very, very long time. He turned and walked out of the chamber. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. Behind him, the galaxy watched a single human walk away from peace. They did not understand what they had done. They thought humanity was weak. They thought this would be easy. They were wrong. Across the stars, human ships were already powering their engines. Human soldiers were already checking their weapons. Human scientists were already calculating attack vectors. For 120 years, humanity had tried to belong. They had accepted insults. They had swallowed pride. They had believed in peace. That time was over. Now, the galaxy would learn what happened when you woke a sleeping giant. Now, the galaxy would learn the true meaning of humanity's fury, and they would never forget. Grand Marshal Chorus stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Might, and smiled at the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Humanity had declared war. The Council was panicking. It was all going exactly as planned. The hegemony had wanted this. They had grown tired of watching humans spread through the galaxy, breeding like vermin, building their little colonies on worthless rocks. The attack on the new soul was meant to send a message. Stay in your place or be destroyed. Chorus expected the humans to send angry messages. Perhaps a few ships as a show of force. Then they would beg for peace, and the hegemony would graciously accept their surrender in exchange for territory and tribute. He was still smiling when his censor officer spoke. Grand Marshal, we are detecting a large fleet approaching our border. How large? The officer was silent for a moment. Then he looked up, his face pale. All of them, sir. The entire human fleet. Corey stopped smiling. Admiral Juan Sionjun sat in the command chair of the HSS Vengeance, the flagship of the United Earth Defense Force. Around him, 200 warships moved in perfect formation. Behind them, supply vessels and troop transports carried everything humanity had. Earth had stripped its defenses bare. Every ship capable of combat was here. Every soldier who could fight was here. Every weapon humanity had built over a century of silent preparation was here. They had been planning for this day since they first joined the Confederation. They had watched the elder species. They had studied their weapons, their tactics, their weaknesses. They had built their fleet in secret shipyards hidden in asteroid belts. They had trained their soldiers in simulations of alien combat. And now they were ready. Admiral, his communications officer reported. All ships confirm readiness for Operation Burning Dawn. Juan nodded. Begin the attack. All targets. Simultaneously. Across Malorian space, 14 military installations came under attack at the exact same moment. The Malorians had expected a cautious approach. They had expected the humans to probe their defenses, test their strength, look for weaknesses. Instead, the humans hit them everywhere at once, with everything they had. On Station Keth 7, General Dohan Choi led the ground assault. He was a short man, with broad shoulders and eyes that never seemed to blink. His soldiers called him the Iron Wall, because nothing could move him. The station was defended by 30,000 Malorian warriors. Dohan had 10,000 humans. Every military expert in the galaxy would have said the attack was suicide. Dohan did not care what experts said. His soldiers landed under heavy fire. They lost 200 in the first 10 minutes. A Malorian commander expected them to retreat and regroup. Instead, they charged forward, screaming battle cries. Firing as they ran, the Malorians had never seen anything like it. A human soldier took 3 plasma shots to the chest and kept running until he reached a Malorian position and detonated his grenades. A squad leader whose legs were crushed by falling debris dragged herself forward with her arms, firing until her weapon melted. A medic used her own body to shield wounded soldiers while calling in artillery strikes on her own position dot in 9 hours. Station Keth 7 fell. The Malorians lost 18,000 soldiers. The humans lost 4,000. But they won dot in space. The story was the same. Lieutenant Minho Beak led a fighter squadron called the Red Dragons. They were young pilots, most barely 25 years old. Their fighters were smaller and weaker than Malorian craft. They should have been easy targets, but Minho had trained his squadron for years. They flew like one mind in 12 bodies. They dove into formations that should have killed them, and emerged on the other side with enemy ships exploding behind them dot in the Battle of the Korath Nebula. Minho's squadron encountered a Malorian dreadnought, a ship class that had never been destroyed in combat. It was 3 kilometers long and carried enough weapons to destroy a small planet. Minho had 12 fighters. The dreadnought had 800-point defense guns. "Follow me in," Minho said over the radio. "Don't stop. Don't slow down. We go through them, or we die trying." They dove straight into the wall of fire. 3 fighters were destroyed in the first pass, 2 more in the second. But the survivors found the weak point, a thermal exhaust port near the reactor core. Minho fired his last missile into the opening and pulled up hard as fire erupted behind him. The dreadnought, the invincible dreadnought, exploded into 1,000,000 pieces. Across the galaxy, other species watched in shock. The Vithani, a small reptilian species that had suffered under Malorian rule for centuries, saw the broadcasts and wept with joy. Their leader contacted humanity in secret and offered supply routes through their space. The Ithari, who had always stayed neutral, began debating whether neutrality was still wise. Even the great powers, species that had ruled for millions of years, watched the humans fight and felt something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt fear. Grand Marshal Corys stood in his command center, surrounded by reports of disaster. His fleets were being pushed back. His stations were falling. His soldiers, warriors who had conquered 100 worlds, were being defeated by creatures who lived only 80 years. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "They are insects. They are nothing." His aide, a young officer named Theron, spoke carefully. "Sir, our analysts have been studying human combat behavior. They do not fight like other species." "What do you mean?" "Other species calculate acceptable losses. They retreat when victory becomes too costly. They preserve their forces for future battles." Theron paused. "Humans do not do this. They do not retreat. They do not calculate. When they believe they are right, they will spend every life they have to win. They would rather die than accept defeat." Corys stared at the screens showing his empire burning. "What kind of species does that?" he whispered. Theron had no answer. In his quarters aboard the Vengeance, Admiral Hahn received reports of victory after victory, but he did not celebrate. He looked at the casualty lists, at the names of brave men and women who had given everything, and he felt the weight of their sacrifice. Captain Una Park's face appeared on his screen. She was wounded, her arm in a sling, but her eyes were fierce. "Admiral, Sector 7 is secure." "They're running." Juan nodded. "Good work, Captain. Get some rest." "Rest?" She almost laughed. "We're just getting started." She ended the call. Juan sat alone in the darkness. "Yes," he thought. "We are just getting started. RT Ed. And by the time we are finished, The galaxy will never look at humanity the same way again. 8 months had passed since Ambassador Kong Tai-ho walked out of the Galactic Council chamber. 8 months of blood and fire and death. 8 months that changed everything. The war was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. The Malorian hegemony, which had conquered species across 100 star systems, was being pushed back on every front. Their fleets were shattered. Their armies were broken. Their empire was burning, and humanity was not stopping. High Chancellor Torin called an emergency session of the Galactic Council. He stood at the central podium, his glowing skin flickering with agitation, and addressed the representatives who had gathered. "This war must end," he declared. "The destruction is spreading. Trade routes are disrupted. The economy of half the galaxy is suffering. We demand that humanity cease hostilities immediately." A holographic image flickered to life. Kong Tai-ho appeared, no longer wearing the simple suit of a diplomat. He wore the dark uniform of the Human War Council, and his eyes held a coldness that had not been there before. "You demand?" Tai-ho said quietly. 8 months ago, you had a chance to demand something. You had a chance to demand justice for 40,000 murdered innocents. You chose silence. And now you demand that we stop fighting? Torin's voice hardened. The Confederation has the authority to impose sanctions. We can expel humanity from all trade agreements. We can blockade your worlds. Do it, Tai-ho replied. Sanction us. Blockade us. Expel us. We survived for 100,000 years before we knew the galaxy existed. We will survive without you. He leaned forward, his face filling the projection. But understand this. Every species that moves against humanity will be remembered. Every ship that blockades our worlds will be named. And when this war is over, when we have finished with the Malorians, we will remember who stood against us. The chamber fell silent. No one moved to support Torin's threat. The Malorian ruling council was desperate. Their Grand Marshal had failed them. Their fleets were destroyed. Humanity was coming closer every day. They needed a victory, something to turn the tide. They launched their counterattack toward humanity's outer colonies. 200 warships, everything they had left, racing toward a small outpost called Station Hana. If they could capture human civilians, they could force a negotiation. They could buy time. Captain Yuna Park was waiting for them. She had only 12 ships. 12 against 200. The math was simple. It was impossible. Yuna gathered her captains on a video call. They were tired. They were wounded. Some of them had been fighting without rest for weeks. They're coming for the colony, she said. 40,000 civilians, families, children. She paused. We cannot let them through. Captain Jin-Ho Kwan, a veteran of a dozen battles, spoke up. We can't stop 200 ships. Even if we fight to the last, they'll get through. Then we delay them, Yuna said. Reinforcements are 19 hours away. We hold for 19 hours. We make them pay for every kilometer. We give our people time to evacuate. Silence. Then, one by one, her captains nodded. 4. The 40,000, said Captain Yunbi. Song. For the 40,000, the others. Repeated. The Battle of Station Hana lasted 19 hours and 23 minutes. Yuna's 12 ships flew into the Malorian. Fleet like wolves attacking a herd. They targeted engines, weapons, command bridges. They used asteroids for cover. They drew the enemy into crossfires. When their missiles ran out, they used railguns. When their railguns failed, they rammed. Ship after ship was destroyed. Captain Jin-Ho Kwan's vessel was the first to fall, taking 3 Malorian cruisers with it. Captain Yunbi Song held a choke point for 4 hours until her reactor was breached. She aimed her dying ship at the Malorian command vessel and fired her engines one last time. By the end, only 3 human ships remained. Yuna's own vessel, the Horizon, was burning in a dozen places. Half her crew was dead. The other half was wounded, but they had held. For 19 hours and 23 minutes, they had held. When the reinforcements arrived, they found the Malorian fleet scattered and broken. 87 enemy ships destroyed, the rest fleeing in disorder. And in the middle of the wreckage, 3 human ships still flying, still fighting. Admiral Juan personally called Captain Yuna Park. "Captain," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you did." There are no words. Yuna, her face covered in blood and smoke, managed a tired smile. "We just needed to hold, sir." So we held. Far away, on the planet Ithra, Counselor Sira watched the reports from the Battle of Station Hana. She was old, even by the standards of her long-lived species. She had seen empires rise and fall. She had seen great powers destroy each other over pride and territory. But she had never seen anything like this. 12 ships against 200. Not for conquest. Not for glory. Just to protect civilians they would never meet. Just because it was right. She thought about the massacre of the New Soul. She thought about the Council's silence. She thought about all the times her people had looked away when the Malorians committed atrocities. Because it was easier than taking a stand. She was tired of looking away. Counselor Sira stood before the Galactic Council the next day and delivered a speech that would be remembered for centuries. For too long, we have accepted evil because fighting it was inconvenient, she said. We have watched the Malorian hegemony oppress and murder and destroy, and we have said nothing because they were powerful and we were comfortable. We called this wisdom. We called this diplomacy. She paused. The humans have another word for it. They call it cowardice. She turned to face Counselor Veth's empty seat. He had not attended the session. He was hiding. The Ithari Collective formally withdraws its neutrality, Sira declared. We stand with humanity, not because they are strong, but because they are right. One by one, other representatives stood. The Vethani, the Koreth, the Seleni, 12 species in total. Small species, weak species, species that had been bullied and ignored for generations. They stood together and said, finally, enough. On the Malorian homeworld, the ruling council received the news of their fleet's defeat and the growing alliance against them. In their rage and fear, they looked for someone to blame. Grand Marshal Corys was brought before them in chains. He had failed. He had promised quick victory and delivered disaster. In Malorian culture, there was only one punishment for such failure. They executed him in public, hoping it would restore morale. Instead, it shattered what remained. Their greatest warrior, killed by his own people. Their soldiers saw it and wondered what they were fighting for. Admiral Juan watched the broadcasts of Corus's execution. Then he looked at the star map showing the path to the Malorian homeworld. It's time to end this, he said. Prepare Operation Final Dawn. We're going to their heart. The fleet began to move. 200 human warships, joined now by ships from a dozen allied species. They flew toward the Malorian homeworld, toward the final battle, toward the end of the war. And across the galaxy, billions of beings watched and understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The humans were coming, and they did not know how to stop. The Malorian homeworld was called Malor Prime. It was an ancient planet, covered in vast cities that stretched from horizon to horizon. Billions of Malorians lived there, most of them civilians who had never held a weapon, who had never asked for war, who were now watching the sky with terror in their hearts. The human fleet arrived at dawn. 200 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They blocked out the rising sun, casting shadows across the capital city. Behind them came the Allied vessels, the Ithari and the Vethani, and all the others who had finally chosen to stand for justice. The Malorian defense fleet, what remained of it, positioned itself between the humans and the planet. 50 ships against 200. They knew they could not win. They prepared to die. Admiral Juan Siajun stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and looked at the planet below. He thought about the 40,000 souls of the new soul. He thought about the soldiers who had died at Station Keth 7, at the Korath Nebula, at Station Hana. He thought about all the blood that had been spilled. He could end it now. A single command, and his fleet would destroy the Malorian defenses. Another command, an orbital bombardment, would turn the cities below to ash. Billions would die. The Malorian species would be shattered forever. It would be justice. An eye for an eye, blood for blood, but that was not why humanity had come. Open a channel, Juan ordered. All frequencies. I want every being on that planet to hear this. The communication officer nodded. Channel open, Admiral. Juan stood straight and spoke. People of Malar Prime, I am Admiral Juan Siojun of the United Earth Defense Force. Your government murdered 40,000 innocent humans. Men, women, and children who had done nothing wrong. They killed them without mercy, without warning, and without shame. He paused, letting the words settle. We have come for justice. But we are not like those who attacked the new soul. We do not kill innocents. We do not make war on children. We are better than that. On the planet below, billions of Malorians watched their screens in stunned silence. Your military leaders have committed crimes against humanity and against the laws of civilization, Juan continued. We demand that they be surrendered for trial. We demand that your government step down and face justice. If you do this, not a single civilian will be harmed. You have my word as a human and as a soldier. He leaned forward. But if you refuse, if your leaders choose to hide behind innocent lives, then we will come down there and take them ourselves. And we will not stop until every war criminal is in chains. The choice is yours. You have 12 hours. The channel closed. Silence filled the bridge. Captain Yuna Park, her arm still healing from the Battle of Station Hana, spoke quietly. Do you think they'll surrender? Juan looked at the planet below. I don't know, but I know what we're not going to do. We're not going to become them. We're not going to murder civilians to prove a point. If we do that, we've already lost. On Malar Prime, chaos erupted. The ruling council wanted to fight. They wanted to use civilians as shields to make the humans pay for every street and building. But the people had heard Juan's message. They had seen what happened to their fleets. They knew the war was lost, and they knew something else. They knew that their government had started this. They knew about the massacre of the new soul. For years, they had been told that Malorians were superior, that other species were beneath them. Now they saw the truth. Their leaders were not strong. Their leaders were cowards who murdered children and called it strategy. The uprising began in the capital city and spread like fire. Ordinary Malorians, tired of war, tired of fear, tired of being ruled by monsters, rose against their government. The military, demoralized and defeated, did not resist. Within 72 hours, the ruling council was overthrown. Human shuttles landed on Malar Prime the next morning. They did not come with weapons raised. They came with medical supplies, with food, with engineers to help restore power to damaged areas. They came as liberators, not conquerors. The war criminals were handed over without resistance. They would face trial before a joint tribunal of humans and allied species. They would answer for the 40,000 lives they had taken. Kang, Taiho returned to the Galactic Council for the first time since he had walked out declaring war. The chamber was fuller than it had ever been. Every species in the Confederation had sent representatives. They wanted to see what would happen next. Date, who walked to the central podium. He looked older than he had a year ago. The war had taken something from him that would never return. But his voice was strong. Humanity did not want this war, he said. We came to the stars, hoping for friendship. We joined this confederation believing in peace. When we were mocked and dismissed, we accepted it. When we were denied our rights, we appealed through proper channels. His voice hardened. But when our people were murdered, and this council chose silence over justice, we had no choice but to act. He looked around the chamber at the faces watching him. Today, we have a choice. We can return to the old ways. The strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. Or we can build something new. A confederation where every species has value, where justice is not for sale, where no one is too small to matter, and no one is too big to be held accountable. He paused. Humanity chooses the new way. Who will stand with us? Counselor Sira was the first to rise. Then the Vethany ambassador. Then dozens of others, large and small, powerful and weak. They stood together, united for the first time in the Confederation's long history. High Chancellor Torin, seeing the tide turn against him, quietly resigned. A new High Chancellor was elected, a Vethany named Cora, who had spent her life fighting for the rights of smaller species. The new Galactic Charter was signed 1 month later. It guaranteed protection for all member species. It created a joint peacekeeping force to prevent atrocities. It established courts where any crime, no matter who committed it, could be judged fairly. Kong Tai-ho was offered his diplomatic credentials back. He accepted them in a simple ceremony, attended by representatives from across the galaxy. I swear to uphold peace, he said, speaking the traditional oath. Then he added words that were not in the original text. And I swear that humanity will never again stand by while innocents suffer. We come in peace, but we leave no injustice unanswered. 20 years passed. On a distant planet, in a small school, a young alien girl raised her hand during history class. Teacher, she asked, why do all the other species respect humans so much? They're not the oldest. They're not the strongest. They don't live very long. Her teacher, an old being who had lived through the war, was quiet for a moment. Because of what they did when the galaxy abandoned justice, he finally said. When 40,000 innocent people were murdered, the Galactic Council did nothing. They were too afraid of the Malorians, too comfortable with their power. They thought staying silent was wisdom. He looked out the window at the stars. But the humans did not stay silent. They fought, not for territory, not for power. They fought because it was right. And they won. And when they won, they did not destroy their enemies. They offered mercy. They built a better galaxy. The teacher turned back to his student. That is why they are respected. Because when the galaxy forgot what courage meant, humanity reminded us. And we learned something that day. Something we will never forget. What? The girl asked. You do not make enemies of those who remember, the teacher said, because humanity's patience is vast, but humanity's fury is eternal. Across the known galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, monuments stood for the 40,000 souls of the new soul. Every year, beings from every species gathered to remember them, to honor them, to swear that such evil would never be allowed again. And on Earth, in a quiet cemetery where Ambassador Kang Tai-ho was buried many years later, his gravestone bore a simple inscription. He stood for humanity when no one else would. And the galaxy never forgot. The stars above shone bright and eternal, watching over a galaxy that had learned, at last. the price of silence and the power of justice. And somewhere, in the vast darkness between worlds, the spirit of humanity endured, patient, watchful, ready. Always ready.